In this session, we're going to be talking about object inheritance within BimlFlex. What we're going to cover is we're going to look at the BimlFlex workflow real quick, and then we're going to look at there's three settings that you can set on or three objects, metadata objects you can set on the objects tab. One is called inherit from object. One is same as inherited, use inherited name, and then we can also be looking at the Overwrite SQL extension point that accommodates these. Firstly, let's have a quick look at the BimlFlex workflow. As discussed in previous sessions, BimlFlex really starts with the metadata, and we can accelerate the development by importing or pointing BimlFlex using our Excel add-in, pointing it to a source data source of any database. It could be Oracle or SQL Server or any other. We import the metadata from there, and once we've imported the metadata, we actually store the metadata in our metadata repository, which is backed with a meta vault to store history and audit information. We also have a data vault accelerator that uses the metadata and source mappings to accelerate your data vault modeling experience. Again, storing all of that information in the metadata store. We're not going to cover the data vault accelerator right now. All of the metadata is then used within Biml Studio to generate out or extend out your Biml framework using the metadata, and then we will build and deploy. So we're going to just cover today importing really quick just one table, because we're going to just look at how we can use those object inheritance settings to extend the BimlFlex framework to use that metadata. So we're going to import one table, and then we're going to play with those settings real quick. With BimlFlex, you have the whole accelerated development environment, and we can have all of the different layers. You can go from a data source into a staging layer or a persistent staging layer, depending on which options you choose. So that's one or two. Then from there, we can do the data vault modeling, push it into the data vault, and then from the data vault modeling, we can also go into the business data vault and or a dimensional model. You could also go straight from staging into a dimensional model if that is your preference. But today we're really just going to be looking at 1 and 2. We're not going to be looking at 3, which is the persistent staging. We've covered that in previous sessions. So 1 and 2. So the object inheritance is really only relevant of taking data and extracting it from a source system and pushing it into a staging environment. So object inheritance, as I've just said, it can only be applied to objects with connections that has an integration stage of source, set to source. In other words, it's not really relevant when you are modeling your data mart to your data vault. It's only created currently to enhance your metadata experience for extracting sources, giving you a couple more options when extracting data from the source system. So inherit from object. So the first one is called the inherit from object, and what it does is it contains a reference to the object it wants to inherit from. So in this case, if you look at the illustration as well, the main office address is saying that I want to inherit my metadata from this address table effectively. So I can create a second metadata entry that says I'm going to be inheriting some or all metadata from the object called address. And then I've got a couple of settings there called same as inherited, which we're going to discuss in a little bit, and use inherited name. So in this case, what will happen is we'll create a source query that's going to extract and stage the data into a table called main office address, but it's going to select from sales LT address. So if we were to set the same as inherited flag, we would actually be inheriting all of the column metadata, unless it is also additionally defined. So if you think about it as a context, and we'll do this in a demo shortly, is I can have a table that has 10 columns. That is, let's just say sales LT address has got 10 columns, and if I were to set the same as inherited, I would inherit those 10 columns metadata, unless for one or two of those columns I define its own metadata if I want to override the default metadata. And then also the use for inherited name, what means that I'm going to use in a select statement, I'm going to use the name of the inherited object. Same as inherited as I've just described here. And one of the reasons you want to use same as inherited is you really use it in conjunction with the inherited from object. And what you want to do there is you want to say, I want to reuse the column metadata, but I also want to maybe possibly define some additional or alternative extract process in the where SQL or the join SQL. So we're going to go through this really shortly, and I'm going to show you some examples of where it makes sense to do that. Use inherited name, use it in conjunction with the inherited from object. In other words, if you set that, it says that I want to use the inherited object's name in the source query. If you don't set that, it'll actually use the object. So in this case here, if you look at the metadata there, I've got sales LT main office address, and I'm saying use inherited name. So when I do the select statement, and I'll switch some of these, when we do the demo, I'll switch this on and off, and I'll show you what the impact of that is when we build out our solution. So the override SQL extension point, this is an extension point that'll actually take whatever you provided as SQL statement and override what is being provided, what is generically generated by BimlFlex. So BimlFlex will look at all of your metadata, and from there it'll generate a select statement. Override SQL extension point gives you the ability to say, you know what, the logic that I have is too complex for it's too complex to put into metadata. I want to go and write my own select statement and then just put it in there and saying use my select statement, I've prepared it for you. This is the same way as when you have really complex business logic that you may want to apply, and you want to say, right, you know, I want to create a view, but not all source systems or owners of the source systems allows you to create views on top of their source system. So this is a good way where you can kind of create a view, an in-flight view that be used in your ETL process. So let me go ahead and show you a demo of this in action. So what I have here is an empty BimlFlex spreadsheet. I've already defined my connections, batches, and projects. I'm not going to go through that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by importing from the metadata. I'm going to select my source connection and my target object here. And I'm just going to go and filter this and say, well, you know I want to look at my address. I'm just going to import an address entity here. And that's it. I'll leave the defaults there. It's not really about the defaults. I'm going to go and set all my entities, which will set my objects and my columns. So I've got a couple of columns there, so I'm just going to go and say, oh, actually I'll do this manually. I'll do it one at a time. I'll set my current sheet here, and I'll just get it down again so I can make sure that it's gone up. So that is now persisted in my metadata back database. So when I set, I push the metadata up to my metadata data store, and when I say get, I bring it back down from the metadata data store. Right, so all I have here is a single table. I'll head over to my Biml Studio solution here, and as you can see there, I've got no tables, I've got no packages, no projects or anything in here. And I'll just quickly go and refresh the metadata of my BimlFlex metadata here, and this will it should bring in just one table there and create my sources staging package here for me. Down here it'll create a single package here, sources staging, and then I'm going to go ahead and build the solution just so that, you know, I build vanilla with, I've done nothing except importing a table, and I'll just build the solution out and show you what we've got there. So I've also gone ahead and created my table script, and I've done this before we started. So I've already created my metadata script, my database table script for this. So let me just go ahead and hit the build button here and build the solution. All right, so that's done building. I'll head over to Visual Studio here. Yes, I'll reload this, and I've got a batch here with one package. I'll open this up. It's got the address table in here, and it's just a single SSIS package. And inside of my data flow task here, I'll just show you the SQL that was generated. So I've got standard SQL here, which is basically to say select all of these columns from my address table, and that's my ETL. So let's have a look at the inheritance here a little bit here. So the first one I want to do is just go and create another table here. So I'm going to say, well, I'm going to create the customer main table here. If I look at that, same customer main table here. And I'm going to say to it that I'm going to move over here to the right here. I'm going to say I want to inherit this. Now in here, when you inherit from objects, if you are inheriting from the same database, from the same schema, you can just enter the name address. I'll obviously go ahead and enter the whole name there. And now you've got a couple of options here. You want to say, do I want to use same as inherited? In other words, I'm just creating a second package. And what you would do here is, a real world scenario that we use for some of our customers is that they have an ETL load that during the course of the day we want to have some of the tables be loaded incrementally or real time or near real time. And at the end of the day they want to say, well, I want to go and grab a full load from that table just in case we've missed something. So some of the systems may not have, you know, real robust CDC enabled, but during the course of the day, that's okay if we maybe miss one or two changes. But at the end of the day, we want to go back and make sure we do a full load. And that's the case where you would have these same as inherited, where you actually want to create the same table, same metadata, nothing different, loading from the same thing with possibly a different where SQL or a join SQL. and then extracting it. So I'm just going to hit same as inherited there, and I'm going to go and say set current sheet. After I've done that, I'm going to go ahead back over to BimlFlex Studio and just refresh metadata. So what you'll see here is I'll still have one single table here that gets staged because I'm saying same as inherited. In other words, everything is the same as inherited. However, what I want to do is create two ETL packages. So what you'll see, as soon as this metadata is populated, there will be a second ETL package here. And I'm going to go ahead again and build this and just show you the impact of doing this and not setting this use inherited name. So what I'm going to do actually now, this build will fail. And the reason it will fail is because it's going to try and do a select from customer main address and not user inherited name. So go ahead, I'm going to hit the build here, and what I'm expecting to see is a failure. So sometimes a failure is a good thing. Yeah, so as I said, the build has failed. If I look at the output here, the error message will basically say to me that invalid object name sales LT customer main address. So it's trying to do the select statement from the sales LT customer main address, which obviously doesn't exist. So I have said use same as inherited, but I want to use the inherited name. So I'm going to switch this on. Again, set the current sheet, and then I'm going to go and refresh it and build it again. Alright, so the build is completed. I'll head over to BimlFlex Studio, Visual Studio. I'll say reload all, and there you'll see that I have got my two batches here, or my two packages here in the single batch. I'll open up the customer main address just so I can show you what it's done. It's going from sales LT address, and it looks exactly the same as if you remember the address one, because I'm saying it's the same as inherited. In other words, it's really the same thing. And it's also going into the address staging table. So this package and that package is exactly the same. Obviously you'll say, well, what's the whole point of it? Well, let's go ahead back over here real quick and just add some metadata that makes a little bit more sense here. So what you'll see here is I'm actually adding some metadata here. Oh, sorry, I'll just switch on this same as inherited here, just so we get the same thing here going. So I've just pasted in some other metadata. But what we have here is we may have a scenario where we actually want to still go from the address table, but we may want to add some additional logic. So in this case, we may want to extract the main, the main office or the shipping office address. So I'm going to go ahead and say, so I've just added a join SQL statement here that's basically going to say from sales out address, inner join to sales out the customer address, and have that join statement. So let me set this, and I'll head back over, and I'll just go and refresh the metadata in BimlFlex Studio and build it again and show you the output. Alright, so I've just refreshed the metadata and then built it. So let's head back over to Visual Studio. I'll say reload all. Nope, I don't want to save any of that thing. And what you'll see here is I'll have that additional one main address and shipping address now. And I'll just open up main address here. Again, go to the select statement here, and as you can see here, what we've appended is this sort of inner join to it, which gives you an idea that you can add parameters, or you can create where SQL, or add more meat to the actually extract query for different scenarios of extraction. Now again, what we're doing here is we've got three packages, and logically this doesn't make sense. What you would normally do is put these packages into separate batches, because you would run the one batch maybe 5 times or 10 times an hour, whereas you would want that run the other batch maybe at the end of the day. So there is other ways that we can split the batches up, or set the objects into different batches, so they can belong to the same project, possibly 2 batches, that kind of stuff, which we're not going to cover in today's session. So what we've got here is we've now got metadata, and I'll just head back over here. Now this metadata, the scenario here may make some sense in certain scenarios, but what I actually want to do here is I want to have my own columns for these two tables and my own metadata for it. So I'd actually want to say it's not the same as inherited. In other words, what I want to do is I want to create a scenario where I'm possibly looking at a source system, and we do this quite often in Data Vault, where you have a single table in a source system that possibly holds multiple core business concepts. So in this case, I have an address table that really is split into 2 different business concepts. The one is the customer main address, and one is customer shipping address. So I want to create 2 satellites from the single source table, and I want to go and extract this into 2 separate staging tables, And I also want to go and model, create source to target mappings on two separate objects. So I need their columns. So they are not the same as inherited. And I'll just set current. What you'll see here is you'll obviously see this error here after the processing BimlFlex. I've got 4 errors here. So I'm saying that, I have no columns. I need to have a business key and I need to have columns associated with every object. I can't have an object with no columns associated with it. So let's head over to the columns here. And what I'll do is I'm just going to go and paste in some columns that I've already prepared. And I'm not going to go through these columns, but effectively what I have here is I have created columns for the main address and columns for the shipping address. And in this case, I'm creating them as, you may have seen it in other videos, where I'm actually creating this as a satellite of the customer hub. So I've just put those in, and I'll set current sheet there. So now I have that. And just to give you an idea here is I'm going to go get current sheet here. And then there's all the tables there, all the objects there again. Okay, so let me head back over so I'm going to head back over to BimlFlex Studio and again refresh it and show you the difference. Before I head over there, I just want to show you again before we start here is that I have the customer main address going from customer main address with the join statement, which is going to stay there, but it's actually going into a table here called address. So all of these packages here is selecting from address and putting it into a staging table called address. After I've built BimlFlex Studio, what I want to do is saying, well, I want this table to select from address using this join SQL that I've defined over here, or the logic that I have defined here, and I have many other options, but I want to put it into a staging table called customer main address, because later on I'm going to do source to target mappings of the customer address info here. So let me go ahead, refresh BimlFlex Studio, and then build it out. Okay, so I've just refreshed the metadata here and built the BimlFlex Studio solution. Just so you can see here, because I don't have the same as inherited suites on, I now have 2 additional tables that I've already deployed to my database just to speed things up. 2 additional staging tables that I need to extract, and I have these 2 packages here. So I've just built it, and I'm going to go back in here and reload it. So the only difference that you will see in this scenario here is if I open up the main address here again, you'll see that it's still selecting from the address table with the where clause. However, now it is going into another table here and it's getting staged into the staging table because I don't have the same as inherited switched on. As you can see, there is just 2, those are the 2 intended uses for this. There are another scenario where you may want to extract once. So you want to extract once from here and then basically apply this logic on the staging table. Now to do that, you probably would need to go and build a view on top of the staging layer to set and then have the same metadata. So you can still you will still have to obviously put the metadata in here. But what you'll then do is saying, well, actually I've got the metadata for this source table, but I don't want to actually run the build for it. I don't want to actually run the package for it, execute the package for it, because I'm going to be extracting all the addresses and then have that in my staging layer and then do some form of logic. Obviously this logic is running on the source, and to have, when you try and join source staging tables together or across things, you need to make sure that the data on the left hand side in the table that you're joining to the table exists for the same sort of time slice or CDC slice. That's why I prefer to actually have the logic in the metadata here than to try and hide business logic into views. But you can also create a view and then just exclude from build here. So if I say exclude from build here, which I'll just do real quick, I'll just say set current here. So what will happen is this metadata still exists, so I can still map the metadata. But what I'll do when I hit the refresh metadata on the BimlFlex Studio side of things, although I'll still have the staging table here that will be created, because you'll need a staging table there, which you can then replace with replace the staging table with a view, obviously, and then you'll have the package that actually will create, I suppose, will run the ETL load. So what now happens is there is no ETL load because you just want to create source metadata, and that's what you will do with the exclude from build. So let's look at the Overwrite SQL extension point as I explained earlier. So one of the things that you may want to do, and I'm not going to really do very complex logic here other than just maybe a where 1 equals 2 here, is you want to go to the extension point, which is up here. There is a number of them, and if you want to have any additional information about them, you can hit this BimlFlex documentation button, and if I hit that, you'll see these two HTML files or web pages here. One of them are dedicated just to extension points. It's explained to you what the extension point are, where they sit, and in our full documentation, our PDF documentation, you will see there the placeholders where you can apply extension points. But let's just look at the Overwrite SQL. As you can see, there's tons of these guys. I'm going to hit Overwrite SQL, and then you can now in here write any select statement you want. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab for the main address one here. I'm just going to go ahead and grab the source query here, and just, I suppose, just alter it. Just make a quick change on it, and I'm not going to go and format this and make it look pretty. Okay, so let's have a look at that, and I'll just add a where 1 equals 2 here. 1 equals 2. Okay, which and then the last thing we need to do here is we actually need to say to this extension point, attach this or associate this with what, I suppose, what table or what package you've got here. So I'm going to say I want to target, and I want to target, and the easiest way for me to know what I'm targeting here is I'll just go and copy Biml here, and then I'll hit it into Biml, into any notepad editor, and it's really this object entity. Right at the top of this is an annotation called object entity. I'll grab that, and I'll then put it back into the Biml Studio here. So if you want to know what you want to target, that is the easiest way to get the name, because it's a fully qualified name, and it could get quite long to type in. So I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to go and say, oh, that's great. I'll refresh this package here, and then I'll build it again, and I'll open up in Visual Studio for you and show you what just got built out with this Overwrite SQL here. So effectively what I'm going to be saying when I build out here is this statement here now gets replaced in its entirety with what I have inside of inside of this statement here. Okay, let me do that for you. Alright, so the build is just completed. I'll hit back over to Visual Studio here. Yep, we'll reload all, and we'll open up the select statement here. As you can see here, that select statement now correlates to the Overwrite SQL. So that's a real neat little way if you have if you have a large business logic that you just, we can also, obviously, as I said, we can add inside of our metadata, we can add all kinds of anything that you can add in SQL, we can add in our metadata, but sometimes as a developer, it is easier to manage a chunk of SQL code than to try and add really long, complex SQL statements into Excel. So thank you for watching, and hopefully what you've then seen there is a way where you can use these in object inherit columns here and combine them together. So obviously you've got the inherit from object. If any one of these two is used, you must have obviously the inherit from object, but they are same as inherited and use inherited name. It makes sense for those two to be always together, but use inherited name doesn't necessarily, without this, means that I want to create a physical object based on a physical staging object based on the object name. All right, thanks, and I hope to see you in the next video.